Welcome to the Aging Well podcast, where we explore the science, stories, and strategies that help us live longer, healthier, and more purposeful lives. I am your host, Dr. Jeff Armstrong. In this episode, I'm joined by a healthcare veteran and a lifelong movement educator with over 50 years of physical therapy experience, Vicki Gold. Vicki is a former director of a physical therapy assistant program in New York City who brings deep expertise in yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, and the Alexander and Feldenkrais techniques, and is a graduate of Landmark Worldwide, an organization for personal growth and transformation. She has channeled this wealth of knowledge into her book, Aging Safely, Wisely, and Well, a movement and mindset guide for older adults. With a holistic focus on body awareness, stress reduction, and intentional living, she offers a fresh, empowering approach to later life. This episode explores how older adults can improve ease of movement, reduce stress, and adopt practices that support both safety and vitality. Her message is practical, powerful, and personal. It's one that helps us all age well. Vicki, welcome to the Aging Well podcast. You have had a long and distinguished career in physical therapy. What inspired you to focus your later work on aging, movement, and mindset?
I got older. That could be part of it. I turned 80 in September last year, and even before I accepted myself or identified myself as an older adult, I was enjoying working with older adults. My whole career, which lasted over 50 years, I worked the whole range of ages from infants right up to the terminally ill. So I covered the waterfront. And I guess in the later years of my career, I just became more focused on older adults. I was never into sports therapy. I was not one of those people who was into all the machines and equipment that therapists might use. I was very much a therapeutic exercise-oriented person. So, and your question, going back to your question, it was, how did I become interested in working with older adults, or getting into the field in general?
Yeah, I mean, kind of what inspired you? What got you interested in that area? And maybe it goes back all the way to when you decided to be a physical therapist. What prompted that?
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't work with sports, so I know I have a lot of students that are wanting to work with athletes. They're athletes, and they're going into PT to work with athletes. But that's only a small part of the PT career.
Yes. So my background is that when I was about 6 years old, going on to 7, my brother was born, and my brother was profoundly mentally retarded, developmentally disabled. He lived till age 69 and was just an awesome personality. But that probably was the first thing that sensitized me to being with someone who is other than your average individual. And then when I was 10, a girlfriend who really became very close over the years, she was one of the last victims of polio. The vaccine had just come out and she hadn't gotten it yet. So she had been in an iron lung. She was confined to a wheelchair and using a respirator for much of her life. And I think she finally passed around age 40. And then finally, when I was 15, I was at a summer camp. And my camp was visited by a camp of handicapped children, physically handicapped. They were in wheelchairs, they were on crutches, and I was totally at ease with them because I had been living with people who were physically challenged, shall we say. And one of the counselors from this camp, in fact, Camp Corolla, I think you can still look it up online. I don't think they function anymore. But one of the counselors said, "Vicki, you're so good with the other campers. Have you considered being a physical therapist?" And I seem to think I was having this vision of being a social worker, although I really had no idea what a social worker was. I thought I'd be planning parties. I don't know what I thought. But when they described physical therapy, I said, that's it. And so at age 15, I never looked back. So that's the story.
So you got an early start. A lot of my students are, with exercise science, they're all like, I think I might want to go PT. I'm not sure. And they're struggling with it right up until it's time to put the applications in for grad school. So you decided pretty darn early. So.
And it was quite honestly, Jeff, it was a lot easier for me to enter the field. First of all, I did have a clear vision of becoming a physical therapist, but also they would sweep you off the streets. They were desperate for physical therapists. Nowadays, especially now that the training has gone to a doctorate level, they are much more selective. And quite honestly, don't tell anybody, but quite honestly, if I went back into the field today, it would probably be as a physical therapist assistant, which didn't exist when I started. But I believe the physical therapist assistants have more time for the hands-on work with patients than a lot of the doctoral therapists. And the other thing I want to say about becoming a physical therapist, because I was on several faculties, and part of the job was to interview prospective students. And I was at Cal State in Fresno when this happened. And I remember the director of the program would ask a prospective student, so if you don't get into this physical therapy program, what will you do? And if they said, well, then I'll look into becoming a doctor, becoming a nurse, becoming an occupational therapist, they went down the list of desirables. If they said, I'll just keep applying to physical therapy school because that's all I want, they were the ones who were likely going to be accepted. So it's not, especially nowadays with all the work involved with becoming a physical therapist, you have to want it because it's going to be a lot of work.
I'll have to share that with my students, a little tidbit of knowledge for them in terms of their applications.
Yeah, and you feel free to give them my number. I'll be glad to speak with them.
Sounds good. So all of this has led to your book, which is titled Aging Safely, Wisely, and Well. Can you unpack what each of these words mean to you and in the context of older adults?
So the safely, because part of the work I've done involves teaching people how to prevent falls. What are the skills that you need? What are the awarenesses that you need to prevent a fall? So that is probably where the safety came from. And of course, RAIN, Dr. Tidixar's component on preventing falls also does more to educate people. So that's where the aging safely came in. The wisely came from not just my years as a physical therapist, but as a woman who's now 80, who's had her share of therapy, insight, personal growth and transformation training. So the book is not strictly about what to do physically, but also I say some of the tips, tricks, and strategies, as well as skills, which comes with the wisdom of aging. I'm hoping this makes sense. So that's the
That
wisely.
makes perfect sense.
And the well is just, I think, almost related to how we feel about ourselves and our situations, especially in our later years of life. So, aging well is not just how physically fit you are, how comfortable you are, how adjusted you are to life. Is that making sense?
I have an Aging Well podcast, so yes, it makes sense to me. Yeah.
Okay.
So, we often really emphasize the kind of wellness aspect of aging well and how, aging well starts pretty much at conception, if not sooner. And we talk about what my friend Jay, and he's going to be all happy that I once again give him credit for labeling our wellness model as SPIES, which is a spiritual, physical, intellectual, emotional, and social. I've always called it well-centered fitness. And that's what's kind of evolved into our perspective of aging well here on the podcast. We're really looking at all of those components dovetailing together to, allow us to age with vitality, longevity, health span, and all those types of things that we talk about. And so, yeah, we're on the same page when it comes to aging well. You've just attached a few extra words that would lengthen my podcast title if I stole it from you, but I promise I won't.
And by the way, I'm sorry, Jeff, what was that?
I said, I promise I won't, steal your title for a podcast.
No, please. So, at this stage of my life, quite honestly, it's not about just making money and protecting my intellectual property. I think the biggest gift and interest that I have is the more people that share this, the more people that share it, the happier I will be. Just like you want to get your work out to as many people as possible.
If you're enjoying the Aging Well podcast, be sure to like, subscribe, or follow on your favorite platform so you will never miss an episode. And if you find our conversations helpful, please share the podcast with a friend, because aging is something we're all doing, and we're better at doing it together. And support our guests in this podcast financially by visiting the affiliate links in the episode description below, and use the links or codes provided for discounts on products we have vetted and feel comfortable recommending to our valued viewers and listeners. Thank you, and now back to the podcast.
I just want to mention that there is a subtitle to my book. It says it's a movement and mindset guide for older adults. And I have to thank my publisher, Stacey Aronson, for insisting or recommending that I use the word mindset, because I'm thinking mindfulness. But she said, no, Vicki, mindset is really, it's a little bit different. It may include mindfulness. And Jeff, you use the word centering. So I want to mention that part of what I like to offer people is simple ways, simple things to think about or do that will make aging well easier. So I don't know if you noticed in the book that I have these 2 ABC systems. I don't know if you saw that.
Yes, I did. And that was going to be my next question, how that's a central theme. Okay. So why don't you take the moment to explain to our listeners and our viewers, what do you mean by the ABC mind-body system?
So a little background first. And that background is that, yes, I am traditionally medically trained. So I get the anatomy, the physiology, the biomechanics. But then I've also got background in yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, Alexander and Feldenkrais techniques. I'm not sure, how familiar everybody is with those. Okay. And at some point, I said, I need to find a way to take all this knowledge and all these skills that I've been gathering and make them available to the lay public, people who don't necessarily have the same background. I need an ABC system. So the ABCs became alignment because of the importance of posture and how our bodies function, right? And how we look. We look better when our posture is better. So there's your alignment. The B is breathing. And here I focus on what I call conscious breathing and slow, prolonged exhalations, because it's the slow, prolonged exhalations that create relaxation, that help reduce stress. For people with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, the slow, prolonged exhalation helps get rid of some of that stale air, or what we call residual air that sits in the corners of the lungs, so that when a person breathes in again, there's more lung tissue to absorb oxygen. And then the C is centering. What does that mean? Well, I actually give it 3 meanings, but for our purposes, let's just say it's mind and body working together. And I ask the question, how often does any one of us have a fall, have an injury, make a mistake, because our mind is one place and our body is doing something else? So by taking the time to do your ABCs, align, conscious breathing, center, you can function more safely, more efficiently. And there are actually, so the ABC system, 2 other components that are in the book. One is the use of slow motion, because, again, that can improve how safely we move, how efficiently it can help with balance. It can actually help with strengthening. If you go from standing up to sitting down in a chair and you do it in slow motion, you're going to be strengthening those sit and stand muscles, which are so critical for healthy aging, right? I think there's research that shows our ability to sit and stand independently is directly related, or at least partially related, to our ability to sit and stand independently. And the last component of the ABC system is something I call the basic moves, which is really reinforcing correct bending, lifting, carrying, and things like that. So that's the ABC system. And just the last thing to say about it is, in the book and when I do full workshops, I structure the training from the point of view of what is it? Like, what is alignment? Blah, blah, blah. Breathing. What is it? Why is it important? How do you achieve it? So we go into some skill training. And then the centering, there's not that much you can do except take the time to just get focused before you begin an activity.
So what are some of the most common movement patterns or habits that tend to limit older adults, and how can we begin to shift them?
The first thing that comes to mind, Jeff, is people plopping into their chairs, right? You take a look at older people. I mean, there are some younger people that may do it also, but watch how a person, an older person, sits down. The tendency, if they have not practiced moving consciously, if they have not learned how to sit in a biomechanically safe, efficient way, they're going to plop. So that's one of the first things. In their walking pattern, what tends to happen to a lot of older people, whether or not they've had a fall, is they tend to take shorter steps, slow their walking down, and you almost get a shuffle. And as much as people may think that by slowing down and taking these smaller steps that they're going to prevent a fall, they are actually not doing themselves a favor. I don't know how else to say it. So that's something for people to become aware of and start working on. And I have to say, I spend an inordinate, I don't know if I'm getting that out right, an inordinate amount of time drawing people's attention to their feet and the role that their feet have in balance and walking. They tend to cram their feet in a shoe and not really pay attention and nurture the well-being, the fitness and the condition of their feet, because of how important the feet are for good balance. I'm on a roll there. I'm sorry.
It's probably even a bigger concern for women who try and cram their feet into small shoes and high heels and all that fun stuff.
Right, exactly. It was a mixed blessing having my father who was involved with shoe fitting, believe it or not. So I was one of those kids that was not allowed into, dressy looking shoes. I had very practical shoes. So today my feet are in good shape, but oh boy, I was so unhappy in those younger years.
Yeah, and you talk about flopping into chairs too. As you were talking about that, I started thinking about, our older generation. I mean, I'm 62. We grew up with beanbag chairs. We flopped into those. So we never really learned how to sit in proper chairs.
That's so funny. I actually sewed one. I learned how to make one. I had one for years. Yeah.
They were comfortable.
Those were the days.
Way back when. We're dating ourselves here, but
I don't
any
mind.
of our younger listeners are like, what's a beanbag chair? So
actually, there is something advertised nowadays. I forget what he calls it. It's like a cloud chair or something, but it's essentially a beanbag chair. So
everything comes back around.
Yeah. I doubt that there are many people your age, certainly not my age, that could even safely get down, much less get up from one of those things. And that's another whole challenge for older people. And that is the fact that they like to sit in their recliners. And that's just poison for both posture and for function.
I love my recliner. But I work on posture and everything else. So maybe I can justify sitting in my recliner.
Well, you know what? My feeling is, if you learn if you learn the principles of good postural alignment, and you know that you want your curve of your back, the arch of your back supported, you know you want your arms supported as much as possible, then maybe you can do things to your recliner, like have a support behind your back. You can still be in the recliner, but your back is supported, your arms can be supported. You can raise your legs, and so you can possibly have your cake and eat it too.
Yeah, that's important. That's what aging well is, being able to eat your cake and have it too. So,
yeah.
And so you have a background in so many different modalities. You mentioned yoga, Tai Chi, Pilates, Feldenkrais. Did I pronounce
And
that correctly?
Yes, and
Yeah.
the Alexander technique. Yes.
So how do you
I had
recommend?
a. Mhm.
How do you recommend people begin if they're kind of new to some of these intentional movement practices?
You get my book. It's all in there. I'm serious, because as I evolved, and my approach, just like as you continue on, you're going to keep having new evolution, new revelations, and it's going to add to what you offer in your programs. So over time, I went from just teaching people align, breathe, center, to realizing that even before they start learning their ABCs, that they develop and they understand what mindfulness is. That mindfulness is turning into becoming conscious of how you feel, what you are doing. You start becoming aware and conscious. And then you decide, well, you know what? I notice I'm not breathing as well. I'm noticing I'm hunching over. I'm developing mindfulness. I know there's conversation about mindfulness in eating for people who may be dealing with weight issues, but any change is going to have to begin with you becoming mindful, and then deciding that you want to change, and then starting to learn the different skills that will help you transform. And that reminds me, Jeff, the tagline for my company is Thera Fitness Inc. The tagline is transforming the ways you move through life. And what that is suggesting is that, I'm not recommending exercises. You do 3 of these 5 times a week, or 5 of these 3 times a week. As you become conscious of how you're moving, how you're holding yourself as you're moving, as you become conscious of your breathing, that happens throughout your day. So as you go throughout your day, you start transforming the ways you move through life. Please feel free to steal that.
Okay, we will. And so, you've been talking about mindfulness, and you differentiated between that and mindset a little bit earlier. Can you talk about the importance of mindset, and how do movement and mindset support each other in our efforts to age well?
Thank you. Thank you. That's a great question. And it leads to what became my second ABCs, because once I had the first ones, which dealt more with physical function, I said, well, what would be a good ABC system for how we function mentally? And that became attitudes, beliefs, and commitment. And looking at our attitudes, looking at our beliefs, recognizing that some are really very positive and supportive of us doing things that nurture our well-being, that nurture our relationships, that help us have a positive attitude towards life. So I think I just knocked myself off track. But
That's
also
okay.
becoming aware, I'm back. Also becoming aware that there are attitudes, negative attitudes. I can't do that. I don't want to do that. Blah, 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 blah. Judgmental types of things that are not conducive to healthy aging and well-being. There are beliefs, especially for women. There have been a lot of beliefs. For older people, a lot of beliefs about what they can or should, do. So by drawing your attention to what your attitudes and beliefs are, you now can choose, well, this is a good one. I like this one. This is really supportive. It's empowering. I'm going to keep that. I'm noticing I have this other one. It's like that little, the positive and the negative little voices. I'm going to, invite the negative one to go away. So we're talking mindsets. These are kind of mindsets. And then the C of this ABC system became commitment. Great. Now that you've done this exploration and you've had some revelations, what are you committed to doing? Yeah, you may be committed to nothing. That became the C of my ABC, of the ABCs of what was it? Of personal growth and transformation. That's what I called them. So I don't know, does
Yes,
that
it seems
answer
like,
the question a little bit?
yeah, it does. It seems like, mindfulness and mindset are connected in that mindfulness is kind of directing and redirecting us to that mindset and helping us to kind of reevaluate what is our mindset. And this is where I think journaling really comes into play every day. It's like, what am I going to work on spiritually, physically, intellectually, emotionally, and socially that is going to enable me to be, as I always say, be my best today, but be better tomorrow, that we're constantly in that kind of growth mindset. And, we
Yeah.
tend to think that we stop growing once we hit a certain age, but, we're still growing until we're planted in the ground. Assuming we're
You know,
planted in the ground. I guess some people are on shelves and mantles now anymore with more cremation, but
Jeff, you just reminded me, my late father-in-law needed rehab, and he needed to work on, especially needed to work on his walking because he shuffled, and I could help him. And then one day he said to me, Vicki, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Well, I went on to YouTube, and in the book, there's actually a link and you can just Google on YouTube, old dog learning new tricks. And there's this obviously very senior dog that is being taught a trick. And, I look at myself. I mean, I'm not quite an old dog, but I'm, 80 years old is considered old. But I'm learning every day the opportunity to speak with you, to learn more about podcasting and all the things involved with it. It's and I want to throw another word in there, and that's the word purpose. Because if there's anything that keeps us young and keeps us moving forward, it's really, I believe, it's identifying what our purpose is in life. Even if it's just to be able to stay alive long enough to see your grandchild get married. It doesn't have to be a big thing like writing a book. It can be the smallest thing, but it needs to be a purpose.
I like to capitalize purpose to kind of emphasize that it is that more forward thinking, global kind of growth mindset kind of thing. It's not just, I did that on purpose, doing it for a purpose. And you're right. I mean, old dogs can learn new tricks. I think the hard part for some of us old dogs is that we have to unlearn the old tricks sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. So I don't know how much time we have, but I'm thinking of some of the patients that I've had, and some of I talk about tips, tricks, and strategies. And there have been a couple of elderly people that I've been working with in a physical therapy setting, and one gentleman in particular, I needed him to slow his walking down, and he said, "But I've always walked this way. I've never." Now, that's the line. I've always been fast. This actually brings up something a little bit different but funny, and that is, it is different. That is having him say the words slow motion, and I really drew it out. Never learned it in school. I just kind of made it up on the spot, and believe it or not, the gentleman's walking slowed down. The other thing I use a lot and talk about in the book is the use of self-talk and the self-talk that we do. And I had used the words can't and should before. Those are actually forbidden words. I describe them as forbidden words. Don't ever tell me what I can't do. Don't ever tell me what I should do. You can make a suggestion. You might want to consider doing this. Uh, and I actually have a story about the power of our self-talk. Would you like to hear it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. So this is a very senior lady who was wheeled into the physical therapy department. It happened to be at Cedar Sinai in Los Angeles. But she's crying. She's hysterical. She's scared to death about being asked to stand up and talk about trying every strategy. Because as physical therapists, as personal trainers, you have strategies to motivate people. You can be very kind, understanding, supportive, gentle, or you can be the opposite extreme. You're going to stand up, you're going to do this, and you're going to do it now. And none of my strategies was working with this poor lady. She's hysterical, crying, I can't. And I said to her, you win. I give up. I am not going to try to stand you anymore. But I need you to say the words, I'll try. And then I promise I'm going to let you go. I can't. I promise you I will let you go. I need to hear the words, I'll try. And then you hear this little whispery voice, I'll try. I said, great, I'm going to keep my promise. And I got ready to unlock her wheelchair so I could let her out of the parallel bars. And I said, well, would you like to try? And I get this little nod. I go to help her up. She stands up, walks the length of the parallel bars, turns around, walks back to her chair, and sits down. And every time, I mean, you can't really see it well here, but every time I tell this story, and this was back in the late 1970s, my hair on my arms, and I just goose pimple, because nothing could be more dramatic about the power our words, our self-talk has on ourselves. End of story.
That's a great story.
It's
I almost feel like, okay, we end the podcast on that note, but we won't do that. So you've kind of alluded to some of them regarding movement and, changing some of our unhealthy patterns. But what are some of the simple physical and mental practices that can help us older adults reduce stress and tension in our daily lives?
So it really, probably the simplest thing is to become conscious of your breathing and use your breathing as a tool. It's probably the key to reducing stress. I believe there are research studies showing the impact of conscious breathing on all kinds of benefits in the body. And Jeff, guess what? For any of your listeners who email me at Vicki@therafitness.com, I have a 2-page handout on tips and tricks for reducing stress. So I want to mention that. But breathing is probably the key, and slowing down. Another one, the serenity prayer. That becomes really significant for when you are undergoing stress. First of all, identifying what is the thing that's stressing you. Write it down in your journal if you need to. Write it down. Identify the stressor. And then this is where the serenity prayer may be useful. I'm going to say the whole prayer, right? God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. So this thing that's stressing you, is it something you can make a difference, or you have no control over it? The courage to change the things I can. So here's this thing that's stressing me. What are some of the things that I can do? Maybe it's a matter of communicating with somebody, delegating, making a phone call, doing something. What's the action I could do that might help deal with the stressor? And then the last part is the wisdom to know the difference. Because I think a lot of stress comes when, our minds kind of spin, the brain goes in vicious cycle, thinking about things that we really have no control over. But if you do have control, what action steps, would be beneficial, or can't do anything about it. And there are more tips in my handout. I don't know that we want to go through every one of them right now.
We'll leave them that link to look it up, and they got to get the book too. So, we don't want to take everything away from buying the book. So, but I will ask you, if you could choose, I was going to ask if you can choose just one or two movement principles that every older adult should learn, what should they be?
It's funny. It comes down to become aware of your posture, because the better your posture or alignment is, the better balanced you're going to be. So that came through in what your friend had said, Jeff. Strength and posture will help to balance, but definitely watching your posture, because if you're bent over, especially if you're bent over because of fear, you're actually inviting a fall. So the more you can get yourself erect, get your body parts lined up, the better your balance would be. Also being willing to, and of course your conscious breathing, because if you are stressed, chances are you're going to be holding your breath or breathing somewhat shallowly. So you get your posture, you align, get your breathing, and then get centered on what you're about to do, and then start the activity, but in slow motion. Don't let anything or anybody rush you. That's really critical. Slowing down so that you can function with control and with ease. So it's more than one thing, Jeff. It's all in the ABCs.
So when you talk about slowing down, I tend to be a fast walker. I mean, I probably on average walk about a, 4 to 5 minute mile pace when I am moving anywhere. I'm just like not necessarily in a hurry to get anywhere. It's just I'm a brisk walker. You don't necessarily mean slow down your pace unnecessarily. You're meaning like slow down so that your mind and your body are able to connect and know what you're doing. Is that more what I'm kind of hearing?
Yes, I'd say that's a good point. And yet, I'm assuming you have a full ability to walk normally. You pick your feet up, you do a nice heel toe strike. But the older person who may be shuffling, or let's say somebody with Parkinson's, or somebody who's had a stroke, they may not have the strength and flexibility and agility that you have, and yet they may still want to keep that old fast walking pattern that they've had. I've got a fast walking pattern, but I'm also, very agile. I can still take long strides, heel toe strike. If your walking is somehow compromised for whatever reason, that might be a reason to slow down. Start learning how to take longer strides, because chances are, you're taking shorter steps. So working on taking longer strides, doing a heel toe gait is important. So it's hard to say, slow down. Yeah, I wouldn't suggest that you slow down. Don't suggest that I slow down, because it would drive me crazy, because we are fast walkers.
Yeah.
But if we were compromised and still trying to walk fast, it may not be as safe.
So that's where the wisdom piece comes in your title.
Yeah, there you go. And I mean, there's so much more, because if your walking is compromised, not being ashamed to use assistive devices. My mom, may she rest in peace, when she started needing a cane or a walker because her balance was starting to be compromised, at first she didn't want to. Well, that's for old people. But I said, Mom, first of all, you're going to look a lot older if you're hunched over or if you're falling down. So if you're going to need the walker or the cane, at least carry it with panache. And hopefully everybody knows the word panache. So, after a while, Mom would be using her cane or her walker. Her posture would be great. Her chest would be lifted, and she'd be striding along. She looked a lot better when she was walking with the cane or the walker than she would have been were she not using it and hunched over and afraid of falling.
So that can be that motivator to get people to do the things to improve their posture and their gait and so on. Is that, okay, you don't want to use a walker? Well, let's do the things that we need to do to strengthen ourselves, get our posture right so that we can actually walk well.
Bingo.
I had a client years ago. This was before I did my PhD, so it's probably late 80s. That was 84, and I was doing some personal training at the Jewish Community Center in Pittsburgh. And this guy, Henry, comes in. He just turned 84, had never lifted weights in his life. And he had seen, you're probably familiar with the Tough study from back then that looked at weight training in senior homes and how they were able to reduce the necessity for assisted devices in this population. And so he had read the article and he was like, I want to stop using a cane. And so he gifted himself with a personal trainer, never having lifted before. And God bless this guy. He shows up. He's got Bermuda shorts on, a polo shirt, dark socks and loafers, big, thick glasses, walking with his cane. And he had a really, really slow shuffle. You and I are old enough to remember Tim Conway and his bit where he used to do a real shuffling walk. Yes. That's kind of how this guy was walking. And me being younger and having a brisk walk, I was always like several steps ahead of him. And I had to realize I had to slow down a little bit. But, in just the few months that I worked with him, we actually got him to where he was kind of just carrying that cane, walking in better posture and really not needing the cane, but the cane was there if he needed it. And so I think,
Right.
it's important for older adults to realize that they don't have to be dependent on those things, but they have to realize their limitations.
So I'm laughing because there was an opposite situation in a way. There was a patient I had who was very severely handicapped with arthritis. She was overweight. She was very senior. She was in a lot of pain all the time. And this woman really needed to be walking, at least with a cane, to give her some support and balance. She would not, she refused, she refused. And of course, every treatment session, there was a limit to what we could do. So she's having more and more pain. And finally, one day she breaks down and she agrees to take the cane. She comes in for her next therapy session and she's glowing with her cane. What happened? The day she took the cane, she had gone shopping and she's on the checkout line and somebody tried to snatch her purse. She beat him. She would not let go of that cane. So, depending on where you live, you may want your cane, but carry it with panache.
Yeah, carry it with panache and, again, wisdom. It's all wisdom. You carry
Right.
your cane for safety, both, is prevention of falls, but prevention of theft.
And you decorate.
There's advantages to carrying canes.
Have you ever seen women who actually adorn their canes? They put bling on it,
Oh, yeah.
ribbons and balloons and stuff. So,
well, that's going to get even more so with the younger generation as they age, because they're all about their bling. They put it all over their phone cases and all that kind of stuff. So, of course, when they have to have a cane, it's going to have to be all bedazzled. So,
the unfortunate thing about the today's younger generation is their health maintenance, but that's a whole other conversation.
Right. And that's where, what we're trying to do with the Aging Well podcast is get the younger individuals to recognize that they have to make some changes if they're going to age well. I mean, I think you get old enough, you recognize, well, yeah, I should be doing this. I should have done this. And then they start making a change. But the goal is if we can get people to not need to worry about these things as they get older, then we've accomplished something here.
Mm-hmm. And my specialty, my background isn't nutrition per se, although between what I do know and a couple of the people who collaborated with the book, there's a big discussion about nutrition. And it can be so simple to eat healthfully, and that's to just be aware of whole foods and water, and whole foods being the least processed, and your water or the least processed drinks. And that's all I'll say about nutrition.
That's all you really need to say. It's really not a big, complicated topic. When it really comes down to it, it's just eat what grows locally, what grows naturally. And if you can't read the chemicals on the label, then it's probably not something that you should be consuming. And if it's clear and free of any additives, then it's probably pretty good, which is water. And you can deviate from that a little bit, but that's where the wisdom comes into play.
So I'm actually looking over my notes, trying to see if there was something. Oh, you had talked in the interview that I listened to that you had done with Jennifer Kern. You were talking about refining movement, and you kind of brought it up again, but the runner that had poor technique, and you talked about therapeutic exercise and functional training. You don't remember, but that's okay. I do, because that's okay. Just the whole idea of every function, everything we do has an ideal way of moving, whether it's running or if it's just sitting or standing from your chair. So learning, and again, being conscious, working with the trainer, working with a therapist is really highly recommended for people who really want to function well for a long life. So that's the benefit of using someone like Jeff or me, even though I'm not practicing anymore, to learn how to protect your body and how to use it efficiently.
Yeah, I think if I remember that conversation, I was probably talking about just how hard it is for me driving around the neighborhood and just seeing people out running for their exercise. And
yes,
you just want to pull over and, correct what they're doing, because there's so many times there's people that are running that, if you just really turned that into a walk, you would get a far more beneficial you'd probably walk a little faster than you're running, and you would get a little bit better benefit in terms of the impact on your joints and just the amount of cardiovascular benefit you're going to get from it. But so many people, they're just not aware that they are doing it wrong and that they need more of the guidance from somebody who is a little bit more professional, a little bit more, trained in the biomechanics of movement and just the physiology of movement. And and I get irritated with the use of functional training as kind of a special area of exercise. And it's all functional training. Our whole goal is to improve our function, our performance. And so, there's going to be exercises that are more on that therapeutic, the preventative care kind of thing. And then there's those movements that are going to propel us in our ability to move better. But it's all functional. And so I think that's probably what I might have talked about in that podcast as well. I know Jennifer and I went off on so many different tangents with that conversation.
I think what might be meant by functional training is I'm thinking of golfers, for example, where there are specific moves that are part of a sport, or when you and I, shall we say, teach people how to sit and stand correctly. So those are functions that you can then add weights to, let's say, the golf swing. You can have a person repeat their sitting and standing movement multiple times. So I see that as functional training, where you're taking a specific activity, reaching for something in an overhead cupboard and strengthening that move. Either way, you still need to manage your posture, your breathing.
Right. And to me, that's, it's all functional. It's all getting us to be able to function better.
Yes.
So what are some myths or misconceptions about aging that you encounter the most? And what truths do you wish more people understood?
I'm thinking of what you and I actually discussed early on in the conversation, and that is that you can't grow and you can't change. And so I think that's one of the biggest myths, or that you should or should not do certain things as an older person. And if you look on Instagram, I don't look at TikTok, but on Instagram, you see people in their 90s. Even I think there's a woman who's over 100 who, what is she? She parachute jumps. And, just be aware if you've got a mindset that is saying you can't or you shouldn't do something. And one of the blessings of turning 80, and I couldn't predict that this would happen, but there's the greatest sense of freedom that I ever experienced in terms of doing what I feel like, what's an expression of my interests, my passions. And so that myth of you can't or you shouldn't because you're older or because you're a woman, lose that myth and just go for it. This could get so deep into psychology because people have been told, or they have these ideas about, what they can or shouldn't do, or other people don't do that, or blah, blah, blah. We are each unique people, each one of us with something to contribute and something that nobody else has. There's not going to be anybody else who's going to be a Jeff Armstrong. There's nobody else who's a Vicki Gold. And just to really nurture that which is you, and let that be fully expressed. And if somebody tries to thwart it, say, excuse me, that doesn't work for me. Something like that. You don't need to be nasty, but you do need to stand for yourself and appreciate your particular needs and interests. And boy, did I go off on a tangent.
That's not a tangent. That's that mindset, that we're trying to promote on the Aging Well podcast. So if you're going to have a mindset of aging well, you have to have that attitude. And I would add too that I had a pastor when I lived on Long Island, and we were talking about, Long Island a little bit earlier, that he grew up, he was an old Oklahoma farm boy. And he always told us, his father always say, can't never done nothing. And, so I've taken that with me for probably 30 years now. And I actually had a guest on that mentioned that I think it was her father or grandfather used to say that. And I'm like, your last name's not, you're not Schurter, are you? And, it was just kind of coincidentally that apparently there are more than one people that have raised their kids and grandkids saying can't, never done nothing. And I think it's a great attitude.
Uh-huh.
My kids will fight it though. They'll try and find, well, no, there's definitely things you can't do. Well, so maybe things you shouldn't do. And there's maybe things that you ultimately won't able.
There, I am serious about totally losing those two words and finding alternatives. If you feel somebody shouldn't be doing something, offer them an alternative. Or I like the expression, have you considered trying this? Which also keeps you from making somebody wrong and setting limits and encourages them to think again. Mm-hmm. It's funny. That's the name of a book I read recently, by the way. Oh, wow. Think Again by Adam Grant. Highly recommended. Has not so much to do with aging well, but just how we look at things and how we take a point of view. Like I was very much into something called natural hygiene back in the late 70s, early 80s, which is strictly raw fruits, raw vegetables, and nuts were my only source of protein. And I was adamant about it. I was a preacher. I was a judge, and what was it? He talks about 4 different ways of approaching your point of view. Again, one could be a preacher, like you really should do that, or the judge, you don't do that. Well, you're absolutely wrong. What was it? Oh, the other one was a politician. Well, if you don't like it, they try to appeal to whoever they're dealing with. And his recommendation is learn to be the scientist. Oh, you're recommending that. Well, I've tended to think differently, but I'll take it into consideration. So you approach things from the scientist point of view, which may apply to how we think about aging and what we can or should do. Think Again. So it was a wonderful, wonderful book.
Well, hopefully we're taking that science approach on this podcast. But it's funny when you mention, natural hygiene in the 70s, I immediately went to unshaven armpits and no deodorant and that kind of stuff.
No, it was, as far as I know, I mean, that's not where I took it. I was going to mention something else. This whole idea of not shoulding on somebody. I don't know if you ever heard of David Roth, Roth. Mm-hmm. Yes. So he's a folk singer.
Yes, I believe I have.
Right. So I was at a conference and listened and wound up buying his CDs, and all his songs have a moral to them. And one of the songs he sings, which is really clever, is Don't Should on Me. That's SHOULD. Don't should on me and I won't should on you. And it's really clever because I think I was shoulded on, with the best of intentions. Our parents, try to lead us in good directions, but I think I got shoulded on.
And David Roth is not to be confused with David Lee Roth.
Oh, so now
a very different singer.
Okay, yeah.
You're not familiar with David Lee Roth? Maybe you were just a little too old for huh?
Wait a minute. Because my husband is much better at knowing singers. I know, like, if a song comes on, I can sing along, but I don't often.
So you might be maybe a decade ahead of Van Halen from the 70s and 80s.
Okay.
So you're obviously not a huge hard rock fan. That's okay.
No, not at all. I like a lot of music, but heavy metal and hard rock kind of hurt my ears. Listen, I was a child of the 40s. We didn't have a TV when I grew up. Well, at least until I was about 9. We didn't have a TV, so we listened to the big bands. I could ballroom dance. You don't see a lot of people doing that now.
That's true.
Yeah, so, I miss it. Dancing on my daddy's shoes.
I never did that.
I don't know if it was, who was the singer who actually had the song, If I Could Dance with My Father Again?
I'm not sure.
Not Van.
I know I'm thinking of a country song, but it's a different song. But
No. And of course it's Vanderos. Oh my God. If I yelled for my husband, he'd know. But it's a beautiful
not Luther
song.
Vandross.
Yes, it could be. If it's not Luther, it's someone who
Might be
has
Luther
passed
Vandross.
today. Yeah, I'm not sure if it was Luther. It might have been. But the whole song is about how when he was a boy, his father would put him on his shoes and would dance with him. And that song came on one day when I was driving. I had a long drive home from a job I had, and it was pouring rain. My father had passed. That song came on, and here I am driving in the pouring rain, and I'm sobbing because that was such a meaningful part of my childhood, dancing with my dad and mom, winning dance contests. It's another story. Has nothing to do with the book.
Yeah. All right. Well, speaking of the book, what do you hope the readers and our listeners will take away from Aging Safely, Wisely, and Well?
Well, I want them to know that I wrote it. I tried to write it from the point of view of speaking directly to an older adult and to make it easy for them to step into becoming more aware of mindfulness and how to do it, why to do it, what are the benefits, and how do you do it? So looking at each component of my ABC system alignment, let's look at it. What exactly is it? Why is it important? Well, you look better, your body functions better. And another story coming to mind. And then the breathing. So the book tries to very simply introduce you to things, introduce the reader to things that can enhance their everyday lives. And it doesn't involve exercise per se. I make that point very clearly. It's like, I hate exercise. I love movement, but I don't like exercise per se. And do we have time for me to tell another story?
Sure.
Okay, all right. I don't know.
Yeah, we
So
do.
this is about okay. So when I talk about alignment, I tell the story about another patient that I had who was waiting in the waiting room of a private practice where I was working. I changed jobs a lot. I liked change. And she was slouched in the waiting room chair. And I asked her, she was a very senior lady. I asked her what her problem was. And she says, she tries to raise her arm and she can't get it up and she's in pain. I said, look, you're early for your appointment. Let me sit you back in your chair. I sat her back in the waiting room chair. I got a towel roll, rolled it up so I could give her a little support behind the small of her back. I rested her arms on the armrest of the chair, and I placed a pillow on her lap. So her arms were really well supported. And then I said, just do some relaxation breathing, and I'll come back to get you in about 15 minutes. Came back to get her, and I said, tell me again what your problem was. And the arm shoots straight up in the air. So if you just like that hair standing on end, the goose pimples, when I tell the story of the I can't lady, same thing happened when I tell this story. Because if anything brings home the importance, the value of watching your postural alignment, that story does it. People with neck pain, all right, who like there a lot of people are prone to forward head just because of how we work, because of tension. So you get this kind of posture. You try to turn your head when your head is forward, it's not going to go all the way. You get that postural alignment, and I do lengthen, open, shoulders down and back. I use a lot of imagery in the book, by the way, to try to help create better postural alignment. But you get this better postural alignment, you go to turn your head now, it goes further. Mine won't go as far. I had a diving accident when I was 18. That's another story. The simple change in your posture, and that's what the book does. It just kind of tells you what I think is an important element to your fitness and well-being, tell you why it's important, and then give you some tools for achieving the better posture, the improved breathing that you can now use as a tool, the centering. There's a strategy in my centering section that helps you be able to function more independently. You want to hear it?
Sure.
But you're still going to have to read the book. Okay. So the strategy is, I call it start, act, stop. You got an activity to do. And so often people are trying to multitask. They're trying to do multi things at a time, or the brain's one place, the body's somewhere else. With this, you've got one activity. Jeff, you and I are having a conversation. And this time, I'm not doing anything else. I'm not thinking of anything else. It's just us. So we started the conversation. We're acting. We're having the conversation. At some point, the conversation ends. Start the next activity. Whether it's a simple thing like washing a dish or writing a book or whatever else you have to do, you start the activity, you do as much activity as you're going to do, and at some point you declare end of that activity, stop, on to the next one. So my day is a sequence of start, act, stop activities. I need to take a drink. Excuse me.
That's okay. So before we start, to wrap up this activity, I have a couple more questions for you, but what are you doing personally to age well? That's a question we ask of all our guests.
So ABCs are part of me. Like I said, it's transforming the ways you move through life. In the beginning, just like learning to sit up straight, in the beginning, you kind of need prompts. You need reminders, and you forget. My day, if you see me sitting at my desk during the day, it doesn't matter. It's just natural. My body has gotten conditioned to good posture. My breathing, I know if something is stressing me, I have this tool to let go. And as I said, I use the start, act, stop throughout my day. So my ABCs live in me. Like I know I'm repeating it, but they transform the way I move through my life. I do not get stressed. It's like I don't get headaches. I give them usually, but that's another story. So that's part of what I do. I eat well. Thank God. I do not have any of the habits or compulsions that, unfortunately, can be trouble for some people. So I eat healthfully, whole foods. My worst vice is I do like my coffee in the morning, and walking. Where I am lacking is in aerobics, quite honestly. But otherwise, I stretch. I do some toning work, but I don't know if that answered the question. And I'm driven by having
It sounds like you've answered it. I think that's probably one of the biggest things that we can do to age well is have that purpose.
Yeah. And do the little things like watching your posture. So if you sit in a recliner, do a little something so your back is supported. Become conscious when you're sitting or standing from anything, whether it's from your recliner. You'll have to come forward in the recliner and lean forward to stand up. Getting up and down from the john. My mom wanted when she chose to go to assisted living, and the toilet seat was low, and she wanted me to get her a raised toilet seat. I said, because we don't want those leg muscles, getting weak. She had a handrail to hold on to, and she totally understood that. So use your everyday activities, maybe repeat them a few times so you're adding some strengthening to them. I don't know what else to say. It's, walking. When you're walking, do that lengthening, that good posture. Become conscious of whether you're taking little steps. See if you can make your stride a little bit longer, because chances are, if you are older, that your stride length has started to shorten. If you can do it safely, increase your stride length. Become conscious of using your heel to your toe. Make sure your shoes are comfortable and well fitted, and don't go using slippers around the house. So many things, and these are all tips you're going to find in the book, by the way.
So speaking of, where can our listeners find the books? Where can they connect with you? You mentioned some web pages. Maybe we can kind of collectively pull those all together here at the end and point the listeners and the viewers in the right direction.
Are you able to do it from your end? Or do you need
I'll be able to add them in. So if you just want to kind of mention it, and we'll put it in the description notes.
The simplest way to both see the book, hear an audio intro, because I do an audio intro, and order the book either from Amazon or Barnes & Noble, is go straight to my website, which is Thera, THERA-fitness. So it's like therapist and fitness, thera-fitness.com. And that'll give you the whole website. And there's a page there that says the book. And you can go in there. So from that point, as I said, you can hear the audio intro or just order it. You can also email me from that website. And I highly recommend that you do email me from the website, so then I can send you the free 2-page tips on stress reduction.
I was going to bring that back up. So you got that in there
Okay.
too. So,
Yes.
all right. Well, this has been a really, really great conversation. It's always enjoyable to have guests on here that kind of have experienced and know their way around the aging process and are teaching people the lifestyle changes we need to do to age well. And you've included a few extra things in that aging well. But I thank you for your time today. Is there anything we missed?
I don't think so. We went above and beyond where I thought we would go, and I really
We usually
appreciate it,
do.
Jeff. Yeah, that's great. And I will say, if you or any of the listeners have any suggestions for who else might be interested in hearing from me or learning about the book, please reach out to Jeff, to me. Jeff, if any of your students want to hear from me, you can tell I'm not shy about talking.
Yes, and I'll share this with my students as well because we have quite a few that are going into physical therapy. So
And they
and on
should
that
feel free
note,
to
I'm just going to
contact
tell you,
me.
again,
Yeah.
I will. Thank you for listening. I hope you benefited from today's podcast, and until next time, keep aging well.